What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Fantasy Bites. I'm Kimmi Chex, joined by the boomer Adam Rank. It's week 2. We have an exciting Thursday night football matchup. But before we get to that, I hope everyone who's watching the show is playing fantasy football. And if you are, you should be playing on the NFL's official fantasy football app. It's not too late to go download it. Download a team, get it going. If you lost in week 1 to your mom, you can start a brand new league in week 2 just so that you're not as equally embarrassed. And we will give you all of the advice. Rank, hit them with what we got coming up on the show.
Well, first of all, I'm feeling that losing to your mother is hitting a little too close to home for you, which is why you're suggesting that right now. But we got a lot of cool stuff coming up. We're going to give you some starts and sits, some sleepers. We got the Club Dub Players of the Week. Air horns. We got air horns this week. Listen, if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't downloaded the all-new NFL Fantasy app, the air horns should have directed you. Like, you'd be like, you know what? I'm downloading it now. By the way, if this is in front of the Thursday night game, or even if you're watching this before the Sunday games, if you have the NFL Fantasy app, what you can do is watch games from your phone. It's awesome. You're going to want to do that. So if nothing else, even if you're not going to sit there, if you don't want to watch us do player stories, like, that's right. You'll see player stories. Like, I don't know if I should start Emmanuel Sanders, and then you'll see his name lit up, and then you'll hit it, and it'll be like Kimmi Chex, or me, or Marcus Grant, or Michael F. Florio, being like, yeah, start this guy. Great matchup against the Raiders. Although now I'm giving away too much, Kimmi. So we should probably just move on with the show.
You gotta entice them to stay watching the show.
They already bounced.
All right, so before we get to the Thursday night matchup, I want to talk about Miles Sanders. Some good news for fantasy owners. We saw that he was back at practice on Wednesday. He was really hyped during the preseason, and then he sat out in week 1 to that loss to the Washington football team. Rank, what does this mean if he's healthy? Does that mean he's playing on Sunday? And if he does, will he finish as a top 15 fantasy running back?
Yeah, there's no elixir quite like losing to the Washington FT. Then you're like, okay, everybody's healthy and ready to go. It's one of those things, you think about if they had been able to get through that game, they might not have even tried to rush him back out this week. But I do believe that once he gets an opportunity to get on the field, he is going to be very productive. We saw him at the end of last season when he kind of took over this role from Jordan Howard, or splitting time with Jordan Howard. He was amazing, which is why we loved him there. And so now you kind of look at it, and with Boston Scott also battling some injuries as well, if he's on the field, there's a good chance he touches the football 20 plus times, which means he's going to end up in definite RB1 territory.
I love it. All right, we are putting out all the good juju, all the good vibes for Miles Sanders and all the fantasy managers that have him on your team. If he is a go, and he's healthy, make sure that you want to get him into your starting lineup. But Rank, I want to toss it back to you for your bite of the week.
Well, I'm going to go with a little bit of an obscure player. I'm going to say that Logan Thomas should be somebody that you're looking at in your rosters this week. As you see right there, he's got a great matchup against the Arizona Cardinals, who have struggled and this goes back to 2019, where they've allowed 16 receiving touchdowns to tight ends. But it even goes further than that. They've historically not played very well against tight ends. It's one of the reasons why they went out and drafted Isaiah Simmons. But we saw on Sunday, there's Logan Thomas, the former quarterback, wide open in the end zone, just sitting there butt naked, like nobody around him. There's nobody near him. And so this is one of the things, and I know when I asked our producer, I said, can we talk Logan Thomas? He's like, dude, nobody wants to talk about that guy. And I'm like, well, let me go through the scenarios for you. George Kittle, injured. Blake Jarwin, out for the year. Mike Gesicki hasn't been performing very well. So if you're looking for a tight end, and obviously if you had Blake Jarwin started this week and you went to the waiver wire and somebody usurped you on Jonnu Smith or somebody like that, if Logan Thomas is available, I would suggest you go out and pick him up. I think he could be a viable option, and I don't think it's going to be as easy as it was against the Eagles, but he had more production than Jeremy Sprinkle, so I think he's a good option this week.
I love it. Can we just talk about Blake Jarwin for 1 second? Because you were probably the number one Blake Jarwin hype boy all this offseason. Were you the reason why he got cursed and got hurt?
I'm going to blame Mike Wright of the Fantasy Footballers, who was also one of the conductors on the Blake Jarwin hype train. So I'd rather blame him because it's easier. But okay. it really like there's times when something like you don't want to see anybody get injured, obviously. And when you see that happen, you're like, I feel gutted And empathy wise, as a human being, like that hurts. And then you're like, Blake Jarwin, like we had been promoting this guy so much. And now I'm sure he was excited. You know, this was an opportunity to be the starting tight end of the Dallas Cowboys. So yeah, that was a tough one. I don't know if I'm over it yet. I'm still I hope he's well, because I know I'm not doing well with it.
I can tell you're incredibly gutted.
I don't really like to talk about it. Yeah.
I know, it's like you're starting to tear up. Your eyes are getting a little glossy. Before we continue, let's first get to some fan questions. Lots of burning ones ahead of tonight's game and Sunday. Let's start off with this one, Rank. Tom Brady or Deshaun Watson? Which one are you starting this week?
I don't know if it's muscle memory, but I think I'm going to go with Deshaun Watson here. I just feel that anytime he takes the field, he's got an opportunity to put up a lot of fantasy points, regardless of the matchup. So I saw the offensive line. It did not look great in week 1, and there are definitely some concerns. It really looks like he could use a number 1 wide receiver. I think that's the one thing that's missing from this offense. And I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy.
Who would be a guy who
I don't
could
know.
fill
Like
that void?
If I was think of some of the best receivers in the game. If you could find somebody like a Julio, like a Michael Thomas, or I think actually, you know what? Cardinals receiver DeAndre Hopkins might actually fit in very well in that offense, but you would have to be an idiot to give up, DeAndre Hopkins. But still,
right.
All that notwithstanding, I'm going to go with Deshaun Watson.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and tweet Bill O'Brien and say that he should look at Nuke Hopkins to add to his receiving core. But all right, let's get to the next fan question. Let's see what you're hitting us with.
Wait, who was your pick, Kimmi?
Oh, mine. I'm all in on Deshaun Watson as well. I talked so much smack on Tom Brady. He's no longer a Patriot fan, so I feel like the Patriots fans can't come after me on Twitter to say that. But I'm going Deshaun Watson all the way. I don't know if you guys saw, but Tom Brady also threw multiple interceptions, one for a pick six. So
the only thing is that people will point out like, hey, Deshaun Watson had 4 points last time against the Ravens. And you're like, that's cool. But we're getting points based on the game on Sunday, not the one last year, or whatever it was.
All right, moving on to our next fan question. Let's see what we got. Jugga Wuggas. Jugga Wuggas, I love it. Emmanuel Sanders or Keenan Allen? Only considering Sanders to start due to Thomas being injured. Rank, what do you think?
I definitely love where his head's at. Like, that makes reasonable sense. But a number of years ago, I doubted Keenan Allen. And I said, I don't like this matchup he's got going. I think it was a Thursday night game, as a matter of fact. And I said, this guy. And Keenan went out and blew up and had a monster game, actually. And he tweeted me on the Twitter machine, on the Twitter book or whatever it is. And I had to have a mea culpa. We had a press conference. I think Michael F. Florio was in attendance that day as well. And I vowed in that press conference to never doubt Keenan Allen, even though I don't think that he's the better start here. There is no way you will ever catch me on tape besmirching the name of Keenan Allen ever again, because I don't want to live that life.
I love it. I mean, Keenan Allen is obviously a great start as well, but I'm kind of in on Emmanuel Sanders this week. Now, Coach Sean Payton earlier today said that Michael Thomas is still kind of going to be a game time decision. There is still some hope that he could start. Again, it's a Monday night game against the Las Vegas Raiders. But even if he does play, I think we have to look at Emmanuel Sanders. He even got into the end zone in week 1 against the Buccaneers. Emmanuel Sanders is a good player. We can't forget that even when he was a Denver Bronco, people were fighting to get him in their fantasy lineup. So let's not forget about that. I think either Emmanuel Sanders or Keenan Allen, either going to be a good start. I prefer Emmanuel Sanders. I know that did not help you, Jugga Wugga, but whatever.
That helps.
We're trying. We're trying
here. That helps. And by the way, one of our former NFL media social producers, her name is Heather. She's been blowing me up this morning because she's got a dilemma with Emmanuel Sanders and Mike Evans. And people really want to start Emmanuel Sanders. And again, I would always say this, whichever way you're leaning, always go with your gut. Both of these are great starts. Anytime that you have an inkling, you think Emmanuel Sanders is going to go off. If you really feel that way, follow your heart, because there's nothing worse than being wanting to start Emmanuel Sanders. Rank comes in, talks you out of it. Emmanuel Sanders goes off, then you're mad at me forever. This way, if you want Emmanuel Sanders to play well and you start him and he doesn't, you can only blame yourself. So it depends on who you want to be able to blame, I think is probably what it
I was going to say,
to.
You sound like you're taking this personally. It sounds like quite a few
people
have blamed you.
personal.
All All right, let's get to one last fan question. What we got? Simon, Todd Gurley or Jonathan Taylor? What are your thoughts, Adam Rank?
Simon looks way too cool for me. Like, he's probably a DJ. Like, he looks like he's awesome. He's probably 6'4". He's a DJ, and he's probably playing all the cool club. Well, back when we could go to clubs or whatever, anything like that. But I think that obviously Jonathan Taylor is going to be the pick from here on out for the rest of the season. We talked about injuries earlier in the show, and obviously you didn't want Marlon Mack to get injured to provide an opportunity for Jonathan Taylor. But it was pretty evident to me watching this game that Jonathan Taylor's rise to being the number one running back for the Colts was inevitable. And he also catches the ball. That was one of the biggest concerns that people had coming into the draft. Like, not just the fantasy draft, but the NFL draft. Can he catch the ball out of the backfield? He was 6 for 6 on his targets. That's not going to be a huge concern. So if you grabbed Jonathan Taylor, Simon, which apparently you did, you have a league winner on your hand. And if you have two other running backs who are already RB1s and this is your flex guy, or even if he's your RB2, you're going to be in great shape.
I love it. I also am all in on Jonathan Taylor. I know we've talked about it before, but the rookies really showed up in week one. There's a lot of incredible talent, Jonathan Taylor being one of those. But now it's time for one of our most favorite segments. It's time for Club Dub. These are Club Dub players of the week. These are guys that we think are going to get you at least 25 fantasy points. Rank, who you got?
You know what? I'm going to go with Allen Robinson. And obviously he made headlines this week because he was taking all of his Bears stuff off of his social media, which is the way that people communicate now, apparently. When you're upset at somebody, you unfriend them on the Facegram or you, whatever it is. And he removed all of his Bears mentions, and everybody, including myself, got very upset. I went on to Twitter so that he was going to be, he's a top 5 receiver in this world, even though the haters don't believe so. And they always bring up guys like Julio and DeAndre and Michael Thomas. And I'm like, oh, the guys who have Hall of Fame quarterbacks throwing to them. Okay, I see how that works. But in this game against the New York Giants, we knew their secondary was going to struggle coming into the year. They signed James Bradbury to a huge deal, but they did release DeAndre Baker before the season started. So it's obviously a deficit, and Ben Roethlisberger was able to go out there and exploit it on Monday night. And so I'm hoping that in this instance, as everybody, especially Chicago Bears players, want Allen Robinson to get paid, that he's going to get like 50 targets or something like that. I do hope that Mitch Trubisky makes a point getting the ball to Allen. He doesn't need to, though, because Allen Robinson is probably the best in contested catches, according to Pro Football Focus. So you can just throw him the ball. He will catch it. So I see Allen Robinson having a monster. What is it, 25 points? I'll put him down for 25, baby. Let's go, A-Rob.
Let's go, Allen Robinson. I love that. And talking about going out there and proving a point, my Club Dub player of the week this week is DeAndre Hopkins. Earlier, we were talking about Deshaun Watson. We said, hey, it kind of looks like he needs a number one wide receiver. I wonder who that'll be. It's because Bill O'Brien traded away from DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins joined the Arizona Cardinals, and he balled out in week one. He finished week one as the number 4 fantasy wide receiver with 29 fantasy points, 16 targets, 14 receptions, 151 yards. He was the most targeted player on the Cardinals offense, and that won't be changing anytime soon. Those 14 receptions that he got on Sunday was his career high. It just goes to show that him and Kyler Murray have an incredible relationship. I know there's some concern for fantasy managers who have Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald because DeAndre Hopkins has gone in and really flexed his muscles and showed what he can do for that offense, but he's going to continue to ball out. This is the best breakup between him and Bill O'Brien you could ever imagine. He's going to ball. He's going to have over 25 fantasy points. So obviously make sure you have him in your starting lineup.
Love it. Yeah, what an inspired pick. I love that. Yeah, it was so funny because I know on Thursday night of last week, it seemed like Bill O'Brien was intent on proving that the David Johnson deal was a good one by running him 80 times. But then Kyler Murray's like, hold my beer. I don't even know if he's old enough to drink beer. He's like, hold my Red Bull. Oh, I'm sorry, Red Bull. Monster. Oh my gosh, I shouldn't be saying brand names. But anyways, hold my energy drink, whatever. And then he went out there and threw the ball to DeAndre Hopkins 50 times. And I love it.
I love it so much. All right, make sure you got all those guys, Allen Robinson and DeAndre Hopkins, in your starting lineup. Sadly, it's time for a break, but plenty of stars let owners down in week one. Coming up, our pal and researcher, Michael F. Florio, breaks down who's ready to redeem themselves in week two. And in the words of LL Cool J, don't call it a comeback. And yes, Rank, I do know who LL Cool J is.
Oh my gosh.
So stay tuned and come right back. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Bites. It's no longer just Rank and I. We are so excited to welcome in researcher and analyst extraordinaire, Michael F. Fantasy Florio. Florio, how you living this morning?
I'm living great. I get to talk fantasy football with two of my favorite people, so how can I be any better?
What, two of your favorite people? I thought I was your favorite person.
He didn't say the two. He said two of. By the way, Kimmi, But by the way, Kimmi, I have to ask one thing, because as we headed to break, you quoted the lyrics of an LL Cool J song. And my question to you, when did you find out that the guy from NCIS Los Angeles was actually at one point a rapper?
I looked it up right before the show. But I'm tired of getting roasted. I am done getting roasted. We had someone who they watched last week's show and they made a Twitter account just to come and roast me and give me crap about not knowing who the Beastie Boys were, but I do know who they are. But enough about that. Let's get to you, Florio. I want all the attention off of me right now. I'm like turning bright red. There were plenty of stars in week one who let down their fantasy managers with some not so great performances, but you have some bounce back players that are going to shine in week two. Who is the very first guy on your list? And do not say LL Cool J.
It is not LL Cool J. It is future Hall of Fame quarterback Drew Brees, who faces the Raiders this week, who have allowed 20.42 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks since 2019. That ranks 7th most in NFL. And in that last week, we saw Teddy Bridgewater go for nearly 20 fantasy points against the secondary. I think Brees can go for more. He's thrown multiple touchdown passes in 5 straight games. And he always plays on Monday night, which I always like. I think it's fun because you're never going to feel out of your game. You're always going to think you have a chance because Drew Brees can go off for 30 in any game.
Yeah, like even if you're down 60 points, you can be like, hey, I think he's got a chance. But what about Emmanuel Sanders? I know Drew Brees seems pretty automatic, but a lot of questions are coming in about Sanders. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, I have Sanders inside my top 25 wide receivers this week. I think that puts him as like a low-end wide receiver 2 or a flex option, but I'm expecting big volume for him and Jared Cook if Michael Thomas is not able to suit up this week.
All right, another guy that you are expecting good volume from is a guy who's going up against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Who is that?
It's Austin Eckler. He goes up against the Chiefs this week, which is a much better matchup. The Chiefs have allowed 6.2 catches per game to running backs since 2019. That is the 3rd most in the NFL. And there's some Austin Eckler panic out there, and to me, it seems very premature for that. The concern with him heading into the season was the volume he was going to see in the run game. Well, he played the 8th most snaps amongst running backs in week 1, had the 6th most carries in week 1. I'm expecting more than one target. I think those targets come starting this week. Do not panic on Austin Eckler yet. This is going to be the week he gives you that production that you were hoping for.
Well, it brings up an interesting point because somebody on Twitter was like, hey, bro, thanks for telling me to start Eckler over Chris Carson. I'm like, okay, heading into week 1, if I would have said, do you want the guy who's going to carry the ball 19 times or the guy who's going to carry the ball 6 times? Which player would you like to start? Probably the one who's going to carry it 19 times. So, yeah, I'm with you.
All right.
Mike, and I actually have more Austin Eckler shares because of you, but I'm looking forward to it coming through this week.
All right, big things and big expectations in week 2 for Austin Eckler. Florio, who's the last guy on your bounce back list for week 2?
It is Titans wide receiver A.J. Brown. He did not live up to expectations in week 1, but he faces a Jaguars team, and he had a game against them last year. 23.5 fantasy points, 4 catches, 135 yards, and a touchdown. And leaving 2019, he had scored 15 plus fantasy points in his last 4 games of last season and 22 plus in 3 of those. And the volume was the one concern with Brown heading into the season, but he ran a career high 38 routes in week 1. I'm expecting bigger and better things, especially because he is so dangerous with the ball in his hands. He doesn't need, 8, 9, 10 catches to have a huge fantasy day. It only could take him 4 or 5 catches, and he can just absolutely go off.
I feel bad for all those people who wasted a lot of fab budget on Corey Davis, who was fine, but let's be realistic. It's going to be A.J. Brown, right?
I think so. Like, Corey Davis is a fine number 2, but he is not the number 1 on this team.
He ain't the number 1 spot, but we have some fan questions before you have to go, Florio. And these are guys who are contemplating who is the number 1 player between these matchups. First one, Kenny Das says, Kyler Murray or Aaron Rodgers? Florio, starting with you, who do you think is the better start this week?
I think both of them have good matchups this week, but I'm going with Kyler Murray, especially after what we saw him do last week against the 49ers defense, one of the scariest defenses in the NFL. He finished as the QB5. He rushed for 91 yards, leading all quarterbacks. And Washington's defense since 2019 is allowing over 2 passing touchdowns per game to quarterbacks. That's the 3rd most in the NFL. I like Rodgers this week, but I'll take Kyler Murray, especially after seeing him rush for 91 yards in week 1.
Yeah, that was pretty impressive, but I don't think there's any way I'm not starting Aaron Rodgers this week. You talk about a secondary that's banged up. The Lions are beset with injuries in their secondary, and, not to besmirch Mitch Trubisky or anything like that, but he did dominate them in the 4th quarter, and I believe that the only thing that could harm Rodgers in this game is if he decides at some point, like, I'm going to give all my running backs a touchdown this week instead of throwing 13 to Devontae Adams, but Rodgers, I believe, I don't know how you have, I guess I understand how you have both of them, but I would probably go with Rodgers.
It's always so funny to hear you ever hype up Aaron Rodgers while you wear your Chicago Bear hat. But we have one more social question, and again, it is at the quarterback position. This one is it Deshaun Watson or Cam Newton at QB this week? Rank, I'm going to start it off with you this time.
Well, I'm going to go with Cam Newton. I believe that he's back and he's ready to go, and everything that I had said about him in the offseason kind of came to fruition, and I know a lot of haters are pointing to the fact that he had 155 passing yards, but that's just the way that you would attack the Dolphins offense. We might have even said that on this show last week, that the strength of the Dolphins defense is right there in the corners, and here he is just dropping one. That's 4 points he didn't get because N'Keal Harry fumbled the ball through the end zone, but this is what we expected, especially attacking this defense. Now, he's going to get an opportunity to throw the ball against Seattle because we saw last week what Matt Ryan was able to do to that secondary. The Legion of Boom, no longer what it once was, so I'm in on Cam Newton for the rest of the year.
Florio, are you agreeing? Is it Cam Newton or is it a Deshaun Watson week? Which one are you rocking with?
These two are really close. I have them back to back, but I'm going to agree with Rank. I'm going to go with Cam Newton here. And to Rank's point, yeah, people aren't happy he threw for just over 150 passing yards. He also had 75 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. He is the Patriots' goal line back, it seems. So I think his floor, because of that rushing ability, is super safe. Plus, like Rank said, Seattle allowed 450 passing yards to Matt Ryan last week. And Watson has a really tough matchup against the Ravens, who are allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last year, and the Texans just seemed a little bit out of sync last week, so I'm going to go with the rushing ability in Cam Newton this week.
All right, I love it, Florio. It's always a pleasure for you to join us. Make sure, fantasy fans, you go to NFL.com/Florio for his weekly sleeper article. That'll be coming out later today. Make sure you get all those picks in so you can set up your fantasy roster so that you can win your matchup this week. But it's time for a break. And coming up, we have our spicy bite of the week. These are the nuggets that are key to getting you a dub in week 2. Plus, who's going to shine tonight in prime time? We preview the Bengals versus Brown matchup coming up next. Welcome back. Before we get into the preview of tonight's game, which kicks off in only a few hours, it is time for our spicy bite of the week. Rank, I heard you're hating on one of my guys who plays for the Chiefs. What's this spicy bite you got?
Oh my gosh, I'm not hating on Tyreek Hill, but the Chargers certainly have been. It's hard to say that there's a team that owns the Kansas City Chiefs, but the Chargers have done really well against them, and I don't expect Tyreek Hill to have a huge game against the Chargers here on Sunday. And one of the things is, over the last couple of years, Patrick Mahomes has not done well historically against the Chargers, and it's hurt Tyreek Hill. As a matter of fact, even going back before Patrick Mahomes took over as the quarterback, he's had just one game where he's had over 100 yards against this team. He struggled with them. He hasn't scored more than 11 fantasy points in any of the last 3 games against them. Now, he did leave one of those early. So I'm really worried about Tyreek Hill. Not enough to bench him. I'm not going to start, some curtain jerker over him, just in your home league. But if you're setting a DFS lineup, Tyreek Hill should already be eliminated from consideration.
All right. I don't know if I like all this smack talk, but I do understand that the Chiefs and Chargers, that's a really good divisional matchup. And sometimes us Kansas City Chiefs don't perform super well against them. But now it's my turn, and I want to talk about Josh Allen. Now, he's going up this week against the Miami Dolphins. I think if you looked at the Miami Dolphins last season, you would kind of start any quarterback that would go against them, right? Not a great defense, not a good secondary. They've had trouble on the offensive side of the ball as well. But now there's Brian Flores. It's his team, new energy. Tua is going to take over at quarterback here in the coming weeks. But I want to go back to Josh Allen. He averages over 31 fantasy points per game versus the Dolphin, which is the most by any player in NFL history. Josh Allen is someone who went and balled out last week. He's a guy who in fantasy football has been pretty dominant the last 2 seasons. So this is an easy matchup for him. If you have Josh Allen and another quarterback on your fantasy team, you obviously want to start him. But that's kind of an interesting number. The most by any player in NFL history, 31 fantasy points per game. So expect big things on Sunday. But let's go back to football. Let's talk about the game in a few hours. It is the number 1 overall pick versus the number 1 overall pick. Heisman winner versus Heisman winner. Joe Burrow versus Baker Mayfield here at 8 p.m. Eastern, only on the NFL Network. Rank, who's going to have more points tonight? Is it Joe Burrow or is it Baker Mayfield?
I'm going to go with Joe Burrow. It's so funny how fickle we are. Like we've turned on Baker. We loved him when he was a rookie. We loved his commercials and everything. Then last year was not so bad. We gave him a little bit of a chance with Kevin Stefanski. 1 week and already he's out. So we're going to be looking at what Joe Burrow brings. And I was really impressed with what I saw from him in week 1. And number 1, here's the running ability, which I predicted on NFL Fantasy Live. And going up against a really tough Chargers team showed a lot of, I know, moxie. It's kind of a cliche thing to say, but it goes back to what we saw out of him at LSU, was that he is a leader out there on the field. And when he needed to move his team into field goal range to send that game into overtime, he did it. Now, his kicker didn't come through, and that's a story for another day. But I look at this game against the Browns. That's an exploitable defense, and I expect Joe Burrow to have one of the best weeks, and I'm not going to be surprised if he's a top 5 quarterback at the end of the weekend.
I love it. I've always been in on Joe Burrow. He was the king of college football. I said he kind of had flashes of moments where he could look like a Patrick Mahomes when he played for LSU. So I, too, enjoy Joe Burrow over Baker Mayfield. And can we go back to your commercial comment really, really quickly? I saw a tweet. It was really funny. I need to find it, and then we'll have to show it next week. But they said, you guys, maybe Baker Mayfield is pulling the biggest one over on us all, and his football career is just to launch his acting career and all the insurance commercials that he's doing. So that's kind of what I think.
Makes sense.
We've turned on Baker Mayfield. He's going to be an actor, not a football player. But more tonight. Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, or Kareem Hunt. Which is the best of those players who could start on your fantasy roster tonight?
Oh, I think this is an easy one. I'm going to go with Nick Chubb, and I've been spending the better part of this week trying to make offers to get Nick Chubb from any fantasy manager who was disappointed about what happened in week 1. And he's going up against the Bengals, who have some problems on the defensive front. Geno Atkins is out. Mike Daniels already been ruled out. I know one of their safeties also not going to play. So this is a defense that's banged up. I really do believe that they want to protect Baker Mayfield. I think that Kevin Stefanski watches film like we watch film and everything. And he saw Baker as much as anybody and probably wants to put the rock into the hands of Nick Chubb. So he's going to have an amazing game.
Love it. All right, Nick Chubb, I want to move on to the wide receiver position. Now, there's a lot of frustration, right? Odell Beckham Jr., another disappointing game. Jarvis Landry, the same. But then on the other side of the ball, we have A.J. Green and Tyler Boyd, who is going to be the top scoring wide receiver in tonight's matchup.
I believe I picked Tyler Boyd. I think I want to go with one of the Bengals because I just believe the Browns are going to run the football. So the Bengals will probably be in a position where they have to throw it. And I like Tyler Boyd to step up this week. It was good to see A.J. Green back and out on the field last week, after all the injuries. But I think Tyler Boyd is ready to ascend here. I think that they're going to probably start using A.J. Green more and more as a distraction to free up Tyler Boyd. I mean, it was actually beneficial to have AJ Green go off last week, because now defensive coordinators got to be like, okay, we got to stop AJ Green still. He looked like the AJ Green of old. That means more one-on-one matchups for Tyler Boyd to have some of the ability to do things like that. So I love starting him this week.
I love it. I also love Tyler Boyd. I'm really kind of rooting for the Bengals. I never thought that I would root for the Bengals, but especially in this matchup, Joe Burrow, go have a day. Tyler Boyd, have a day. We're rooting for you. That's going to do it for our show this week. Again, this is Fantasy Bites. I'm Kimmi Chex. That is Adam Rank. You know, even though the show is over tonight, make sure that you tweet us at NFL Fantasy for all of your questions. We'll help you set your lineups. And also on Sunday, we have a new show called NFL Fantasy Game Day, Sunday morning, starting at noon Eastern in the NFL Fantasy app on NFL.com, Facebook, and YouTube. Make sure you check it out. This is Fantasy Bites. We'll see you next week.